They didn't trip. They didn't make a mistake. They grabbed his dog, a living soul, and hurled him into a city trash bin, like yesterday's garbage. And they laughed because they thought no one was watching. But Sylvester Stallone was. He sat on his porch that morning, sipping black coffee from a battered old mug, the kind you keep long after it chips because it fits your hand just right. He wasn't looking for trouble. Not here. Not in Willow Creek, California. A town that promised peace, promised a quiet place to breathe after too many years spent under spotlights and in the ring. He thought he'd finally found a place where he and Buck, his 13-year-old English bulldog, could grow old together without anyone asking for autographs or taking cheap shots at faded fame. Most of the folks on Pine Hollow Road left him alone. They'd give him a nod if they saw him walking Buck down to the corner store, or a tight smile over the tops of their mailboxes. A few had recognized him, sure. You didn't live through decades of movie posters and arena fights without leaving some kind of mark. But in Willow Creek, folks respected privacy, and that suited him just fine. The morning was cool, mist rolling in from the distant Sierra foothills. Birds chirped half-heartedly from the power lines, and a soft breeze stirred the loose gravel along the curb. Buck ambled across the small front lawn, sniffing patches of clover, his graying jowls flapping with every happy grunt. Stallone watched him with the easy fondness that came from years of loyalty built bone deep. This dog had been with him through the hard years, the quiet years when the phones stopped ringing, when the faces in the mirror seemed a little more like strangers every day. That's when the Tahoe came creeping down the street. It was a big white SUV, no plates, no decals, riding low on worn suspension. Sylvester stiffened in his chair, the old instincts stirring somewhere deep inside his chest. Something about the way it prowled down Pine Hollow Road, slow and deliberate, didn't sit right. He set down his coffee and straightened slightly, his hand brushing the rough wood of the porch rail. Two men climbed out. They wore dark navy uniforms, cheap knockoffs stitched with the words Community Compliance Officer, where a real badge should have been. One was big, square-shouldered, with mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. The other was wiry and young, too jittery for a real cop. Sylvester's jaw tightened. No insignia, no cruiser, no clipboards. Just smug smiles and bad intentions. They didn't even look at him. They looked at Buck. "Violation of Pet Ordinance 12B," the bigger one barked, flashing a flimsy laminated card that looked freshly printed at Staples. "Dangerous animal, unsecured. We're authorized to remove it." Sylvester stood slowly, the boards under his boots creaking. "There's no 12B in Willow Creek," he said, voice low and steady. "I checked when I moved in." The wiry one didn't even blink. He was already moving toward Buck, a slip lead dangling from his belt. Buck, bless him, just wagged his tail and looked up with trusting eyes. Sylvester moved to intercept, but not fast enough. The wiry kid snatched Buck by the collar, yanked him off his paws, and before Stallone could take another step, he swung the dog up and dumped him into the green trash bin at the curb. Buck yelped, scrambling against the slick plastic walls, the bin rattling violently before settling with a hollow thud. Laughter, short, mean. The taller man adjusted his sunglasses and turned away like he'd just swatted a fly. Time didn't slow down. It collapsed. Stallone felt everything sharpen into brutal focus, the grind of gravel under boots, the metallic rattle of the bin lid, the pulse hammering in his ears. Every fight, every stadium roar, every broken bone he'd ever fought through came rushing back, not as anger, but as clarity. He crossed the lawn in 3 quick strides. The wiry kid didn't even see him coming. Stallone's left hand grabbed a fistful of the kid's hoodie, yanked him forward, and slammed him hard into the side of the Tahoe. The sound of the impact cracked across the sleepy street, scattering a few startled pigeons from the telephone wires. The big man fumbled for something at his hip. Maybe a baton, maybe a bluff. It didn't matter. Stallone stepped in, shifted his weight, and drove a hammering elbow into the man's solar plexus. Air whooshed out of him in a ragged grunt. He folded like wet cardboard. Somewhere, a door creaked open. Someone gasped. A cell phone was raised, already recording. Sylvester ignored it all. He turned back to the bin, heart hammering, yanked open the lid. Buck was there, panting, eyes wide, paws scrabbling against the plastic. Sylvester lifted him out carefully, cradling the old dog against his chest, feeling the tremor in his small frame. The wiry kid staggered to his feet, spitting blood onto the curb. "You're done, old man," he hissed, voice thick with rage. "You just assaulted officers of the law." Stallone shifted Buck against his hip, standing tall, eyes burning into the young man's skull. "You're not officers," he said, his voice carrying across the block. "And you're gonna regret ever thinking you could pull this here." The 2 fake enforcers staggered back to their Tahoe, climbing in without dignity, doors slamming shut. The engine roared, tires screeched, and they peeled out down the street, leaving behind a wake of dust and the acrid stink of burned rubber. Sylvester didn't chase. He didn't shout. He just stood there in the middle of Pine Hollow Road, Buck tucked safely against him, watching the dust settle. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains. A few whispered. More smartphones appeared, faces pressed against screens, recording, posting, sending the story out into the world. Stallone didn't care about the cameras. This wasn't about headlines or viral videos. This was about something simpler, something older, about standing his ground, about protecting what mattered. He carried Buck back to the porch, set him down gently, and sat back in his chair, hands resting on his knees. His coffee had gone cold. He didn't touch it. He just sat there, the warm evening breeze tugging gently at his sleeves, and let the old instincts settle deep into his bones. He knew the fight wasn't over. Not yet. They had crossed a line. And Sylvester Stallone had spent his entire life teaching men exactly what happened when they crossed that line. Stallone didn't sleep that night. He sat in the old rocking chair by the window, Buck curled beside his boots, the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock filling the quiet house. He thought he'd left this part of himself behind. The man who couldn't close his eyes because danger might be lurking just outside the frame. But now, every creak of the porch boards, every flicker of the street light against the pine trees outside made him sit up straighter. By dawn, the decision was made. He wasn't going to roll over. He wasn't going to pack up and move again like some worn-out drifter. Buck had fought alongside him for 13 years, through the empty hotel rooms, the endless training camps, the slow march of loneliness, after the crowds forgot his name. Now it was his turn to fight for Buck. He started with City Hall. Willow Creek didn't have much of a government, just a few clerks and a part-time mayor who spent more time fishing than governing. Stallone leaned across the counter, weathered hands gripping the edge, and asked to see any record of a community compliance division. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with horn-rimmed glasses, and a faint smell of peppermint, blinked twice, then shook her head. "We don't have any division like that," she said. "Animal control is contracted out to Sacramento County. If there was a real problem, they'd be the ones handling it." She pulled up the official ordinances. There was no 12B, no dangerous dog statute, nothing even close. Stallone thanked her, tipped his cap, and walked out into the bright morning, the wheels in his head already turning. This wasn't about an overzealous HOA president or some rookie animal control officer trying to impress his boss. This was bigger, dirtier. Someone was running a scam, and they were getting bolder. The way those two had moved, the SUV, the fake badges, it wasn't their first time. And if they had the guts to snatch buck in broad daylight, on a quiet street where everyone knew everyone, they weren't afraid of getting caught. That meant they had cover, or at least thought they did. The next stop was Roy's Diner, a local joint where old men nursed coffee for hours and gossiped about everything from high school football scores to town council arguments. Stallone slid into a corner booth, ordered black coffee, and waited. It didn't take long. News of the incident had already made the rounds. A wiry man in a flannel shirt leaned over from the next booth. "Heard about what happened," he muttered, eyes darting around. "Those weren't real cops. They're freelancers. Got a buddy whose nephew's dog went missing same way last month." He tapped a gnarled finger against the tabletop. "Word is, they sell 'em. Breeders, labs, sometimes out-of-state buyers. Anything they can move quick and quiet." Stallone sat back, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Buck had been lucky. Most wouldn't be. He finished his coffee, left a crisp 10 under the saucer, and walked out without a word. The fog in his mind cleared as the pieces clicked together. These weren't isolated incidents. It was an operation, systematic, organized, probably run by someone who understood small-town rhythms, how to move in and out without attracting too much heat. That night, he sat on the porch with Buck sleeping at his feet, watching the stars blink to life above the trees. Across the street, porch lights flicked off one by one. A coyote howled somewhere beyond the fields. Stallone listened, patient as a stone. When the white Tahoe rolled down Pine Hollow Road again, he didn't move. He just watched, eyes narrowing as it slowed near the Johnson's place, the engine barely a whisper. Different uniforms this time. Same scam. They didn't even glance toward Stallone's porch. That was a mistake. He memorized the plates, even though half the numbers were obscured by mud. He saw the slight sag of the rear axle, the radio antennae installed wrong, the way the driver kept tapping the steering wheel like he was ready to bolt. In the morning, Stallone called in a favor. Back in the 80s, before the fame, before the long string of fight posters and late-night interviews, he'd trained at a grimy boxing gym in Oakland. One of his old sparring partners had become a sheriff's deputy. Stallone still had his number scribbled in an old address book. Deputy Mark Hennessy didn't waste time. "You've got a problem," he said after hearing the story. "Big one. And if what you're saying is true, it's not just Willow Creek. Towns all around here have had pet thefts spike in the last year. Most folks figure it's just bad luck." They agreed to meet at the abandoned fairgrounds, a few miles out of town, away from curious eyes. Stallone parked his truck behind the derelict ticket booth. Buck perched beside him, alert despite his graying muzzle. Hennessy showed up in an unmarked Ford Crown Victoria, civilian clothes, ball cap pulled low. "You sure you want to get involved in this?" he asked, sliding a manila folder across the bench seat. You could just move. Safer that way. Stallone didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the rusting Ferris wheel, silhouetted against the setting sun, the empty fairground, like a ghost of better times. I'm tired of running, he said finally. And I'm damn tired of bullies, thinking nobody's going to stand up to them. Hennessy smiled thinly, like a man remembering his own battles. Good, because if we're going to bring 'em down, we need bait. For the first time in days, Stallone felt the tightness in his chest ease. This wasn't just about Buck anymore. It was about every scared family who found an empty leash where their dog used to be. About the quiet shame that settled in a town when people started looking over their shoulders instead of waving across their lawns. They drew up a plan. Simple, dangerous, and exactly the kind of thing that played to Stallone's strengths. He would walk Buck through the park at sunset. A slow, easy target, the way he used to after dinner. No leash, no fence, vulnerable, an easy mark. Hennessy and a small team would be stationed nearby, concealed, waiting. If the Tahoe showed up, and it would, they'd catch them in the act. That night, as Stallone tightened Buck's collar and checked the leash clasp twice for good measure, he knelt down and rubbed the old bulldog's ears. It's gonna be okay, buddy, he whispered. Buck licked his hand once, as if he understood. The sun was just bleeding out behind the pines when Stallone set off down Pine Hollow Road, Buck trotting faithfully beside him, unaware of the trap they were laying. His heart beat slow and steady, each step a drum in his chest. Neighbors waved from their porches, but Stallone kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning every car, every movement. The park loomed ahead, shadows stretching long across the grass. Buck's paws crunched softly on the gravel path. Stallone walked slow, deliberate, letting the evening air fold around them, waiting. And then he heard it, the low, familiar hum of the Tahoe's engine. The white Tahoe slowed, almost casual, like a wolf pacing outside a sheepfold. Stallone kept walking, one hand loosely curled around Buck's leash, the other resting against his hip. He didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. He could feel the tension bleeding off the vehicle like heat from a dying fire. The SUV rolled to a stop by the curb, engine idling low. Two men stepped out, different faces, same cheap uniforms. Their movements were cocky, careless, the kind that came from thinking nobody would ever fight back. One had a short-cropped buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses. The other, a thick-necked bruiser with a smirk that Stallone wanted to wipe clean off his face. They moved towards him in a slow arc, casual, but cutting off escape routes like seasoned predators. Stallone slowed his pace, allowing them to close the distance, giving Hennessy's team the time they needed to get into position. "Evening, sir," Buzzcut called out, voice syrupy sweet. "Lovely dog you've got there. Mind if we ask a few questions about your pet compliance papers?" Stallone stopped, shifted Buck behind his leg protectively, and let the weight of his stare land heavy between them. He didn't say a word. The second man produced a laminated ID badge, so fake it might as well have come from a cereal box. "There's been some concerns about dangerous animals in... We'll just need to take the animal for a quick evaluation. Routine stuff." Stallone's jaw flexed. Buck growled low, a deep rumble vibrating against Stallone's calf. The two men hesitated for a heartbeat. Maybe they finally noticed the way Stallone stood. Relaxed, yes, but balanced, grounded, like a coiled spring hidden inside a worn-out frame. The bruiser stepped forward anyway, reaching out with a gloved hand. "Come on, buddy," he cooed mockingly toward Buck. That's when Stallone moved. It wasn't flashy. No haymaker punches, no wild swings. It was efficient, brutal, the kind of violence born from decades of muscle memory. His right foot snapped out in a precision sidekick that caught the bruiser square in the knee. There was a sickening pop as the joint buckled sideways. The man collapsed with a howl, grabbing at his ruined leg. Before Buzzcut could react, Stallone closed the distance and delivered a short, sharp elbow strike to the man's jaw. The crack echoed across the quiet park. Buzzcut crumpled, legs folding awkwardly beneath him as he hit the ground. Within seconds, Hennessy and two plainclothes deputies emerged from the shadows, guns drawn, badges flashing. "Sheriff's Department! Hands where we can see them!" they barked. The two fake enforcers didn't have a chance. One tried to reach for something at his belt, a baton, or maybe a taser, but Hennessy was on him in a flash, wrenching his arm behind his back and slamming him face down into the gravel. The second man whimpered, holding his shattered knee, offering no resistance as he was cuffed. Stallone stepped back, breathing slow and even, Buck pressed tight against his side. Hennessy glanced over his shoulder. "You all right?" Stallone nodded once, brief and sharp. Deputies started pulling evidence from the Tahoe. Forged documents, unmarked dog crates, bolt cutters, zip ties. One deputy held up a clipboard thick with addresses and notes. "Looks like they had a full schedule tonight," he muttered grimly. Word traveled fast in Willow Creek. By the time Stallone walked back home, a few curious faces were peeking from windows. Porch lights blinking on up and down Pine Hollow Road. He didn't mind. Let them see. Let them know that the fear prowling their streets had been dragged into the light. The next morning, the town square buzzed louder than Sunday service. Local news vans jostled for parking near the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions over one another, cameras flashing. Stallone stayed away from the chaos. He had no interest in 15 minutes of fame. Hennessy handled the media, confirming the arrests, outlining the charges: fraud, impersonating public officers, conspiracy to commit theft. Over a dozen families across 3 counties had come forward already, some with missing pets, others with strange encounters eerily similar to Stallone's. Investigators were tracing connections back to a network of illegal breeders and underground lab suppliers stretching halfway to Nevada. None of that mattered to Stallone as much as Buck, who now snored peacefully beside his feet on the porch. The old bulldog had a new limp from bruised ribs, but seemed otherwise none the worse for wear. Stallone ran a rough hand over Buck's broad head, feeling the deep, steady thump of his heartbeat beneath the fur. Later that week, the town held a gathering at Willow Creek Park. It wasn't official, no speeches, no ceremonies. Just folding chairs, neighbors bringing casseroles and thermoses of coffee, kids chasing each other across the open field. The kind of gathering small towns used to be built on, before fear and suspicion took root. Someone strung up a canvas banner between 2 pine trees. "Thank you, Sylvester." He smiled quietly when he saw it, the lines around his eyes deepening. People he barely knew came up to shake his hand, clap him on the back, offer shy words of thanks. Mrs. Simmons, whose schnauzer had disappeared last winter. The Garcias, whose Labrador had been snatched right out of their backyard. Even old Mr. Turner, who once scowled at Stallone every morning from behind his newspaper, managed a firm nod of respect. For a long time, Stallone had lived with the idea that fighting was something ugly, something best left buried under the ruins of the past. But standing there, feeling the warmth of a community knitted back together by courage instead of fear, he realized he had been wrong. Fighting wasn't about fists or fury. It was about standing up when it mattered, protecting what couldn't protect itself, refusing to look the other way when evil came dressed in a uniform or a smile. As twilight deepened into night, Stallone sat on the grass beside Buck, watching the stars emerge one by one. A little girl toddled over, maybe 4 years old, clutching a crumpled drawing in one hand. She offered it shyly. He unfolded it carefully. Crayon lines formed a picture of a man standing in front of a trash bin, a dog beside him, a big shining badge on his chest made of pure gold. Above it, in shaky block letters, it said, "Our hero." Stallone looked up, his throat tight. He ruffled the girl's hair gently and nodded. Maybe he wasn't the hero people expected. Maybe he didn't wear a cape or deliver rousing speeches. But he was something better. He was the kind of hero who showed up when it counted, fists clenched, heart wide open. The past would always be part of him, the arenas, the spotlight, the noise. But here, under the wide open sky of Willow Creek, among people who remembered how to live without fear, Sylvester Stallone had finally found something worth fighting for again. And this time, he wasn't fighting alone.